Hello and welcome. In this instructional materials training, we will cover accessibility and what you need to know in order to successfully meet the accessibility requirements for the instructional materials review and approval process. We are firmly committed to ensuring that instructional materials are accessible to all users. In addition to this training, you should review all accessibility guidelines outlined by the State Board of Education, which can be found on the Texas Education Agency website. Let's get started by establishing a common understanding of accessibility and its impact on supporting the success of students and educators. Accessibility focuses on how a person with disabilities accesses or benefits from a site, system, or application. The accessibility of electronic and print materials can benefit a number of disabilities, including cognitive disabilities that may impact a person's ability to perform mental tasks, physical disabilities that impair a person's ability to perform physical tasks, auditory disabilities that may impact a student's ability to hear or listen, visual disabilities that affect a person's ability to see, and finally, disabilities that impact a person's speech. An individual's need for accessible materials can span a wide spectrum. Consider these three categories: permanent, temporary, or situational. While an accessibility feature may be designed for a student or educator with a permanent impairment, the reality is that this same design will benefit students and educators from across the spectrum. Consider this in the context of closed captioning. While this accessible design may be originally intended for a student or educator with a permanent disability associated with hearing loss, it can also benefit a user with a temporary constraint, such as a student learning to read, or a situational constraint, such as a noisy environment. Now, let's take a closer look at a specific example of how you can make your content more accessible via screen readers to students and educators across these spectrums. While the Texas Education Agency doesn't endorse any specific assistive technologies, students and educators may be using a variety of screen readers to access your content, such as Non-Visual Desktop Access, NVDA, Job Access with Speech, JAWS, Microsoft's Narrator, and Apple's VoiceOver, to name a few. A screen reader experience may be designed for the permanent impairment of blindness, but a situational impairment, such as a student forgetting their glasses at home, may also benefit from this accessibility. Let's look at a few accessibility practices that can help students and educators as they engage in your content using a screen reader. First, always describe images through alternative text. The screen reader will use this text to describe the image or non-text content to the user. Consider this example. Without descriptive alternative text, this image would be read img_534462.png. When proper alternative text is used, the image would be read girl listening with headphones. When using video, always include transcripts. This transcript can be read aloud to the user and should include the audio narration and descriptions of any important visual found in the video. When designing a layout, use one that is linear and logical. Don't spread content all over a page. And finally, use descriptive links and headings. Avoid link text that is less informative. For example, instead of using the words "read more" for a link, use "read more about publisher accessibility requirements." This additional detail allows the screen reader to clearly communicate the purpose of the link to the user. For context, let's watch a brief screen reader experience.
You are currently in a group. Play group. You are currently on a button, group, inside of web content. To click this button, press Ctrl, Option, Space. To exit this web area, press Ctrl, Option, Shift, up arrow.
Destiny's Gift by Natasha Anastasia Tarpley. Illustrated by Ajoa J. Burrows.
Go to next page. Group. You are currently on a button, group, inside of web content. To click this button, press Ctrl.
Hopefully, these simple tips provide you with a few additional ideas for how to improve the accessibility of your instructional material and benefit all students. Now, let's spend some time getting acquainted with these accessibility guidelines and criteria. All electronic materials or web-based materials approved by the State Board of Education are required to be offered in accordance with the technical standards of the Federal Rehabilitation Act, Section 508. And all web content must conform to the latest version of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. Let's take a moment to learn a bit more about the Federal Rehabilitation Act and Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Amended in 1998, the Federal Rehabilitation Act requires agencies to provide individuals with disabilities equal access to electronic information and data comparable to those who do not have disabilities. To learn more about Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, go to https://www.section508.gov/manage/laws-and-policies/ WCAG, or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, cover a wide range of recommendations to make web-based content more accessible to users. The current version of these guidelines, 2.1, offers the most up-to-date criteria. Let's break down WCAG further to understand the latest version and the conformance levels. WCAG, or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, is an internationally recognized set of recommendations for improving web accessibility. WCAG 1.0 was originally released in 1999, and WCAG 2.1 represents the third version of the guidelines. This is the version of WCAG that is currently required. AA is one of three conformance levels: Single A, AA, and AAA. AA is considered as providing a reasonably accessible experience for most users and is required by the State Board of Education. To learn more about WCAG 2.1 AA standards, go to https://www.w3.org/tr/WCAG21/ As you begin to prepare and review your materials, problems or issues may be identified. Being aware of common issues can go a long way in helping you avoid them. Let's look closely at a few of these problems and possible solutions. We will use the acronym POUR, or Perceivable, Operable, Understandable, and Robust, to guide our exploration. Each of these areas is directly aligned to one of the 4 success criteria of WCAG 2.1. Let's start with perceivable. Perceivable means the user can identify and interact with experiences by means of their senses. For many users, this means engaging in the experience visually, while for others, perceivability is connected to sound or touch. Aligned to WCAG success criteria number 1, Perceivable is made up of 4 guidelines: text alternatives, time-based media, adaptable, and distinguishable. Let's look at a common error related to perceivable. One of the most common perceivability errors has to do with the use of non-text content. Here are a few tips to guide you. Non-English text, symbols, or images. Often these items represent meaning to the user, but do not contain alternative text. Alternative text is a critical element when materials must be changed into Braille, speech, or other accessible formats to support users. WCAG 2.1 AA requires that clear and meaningful alternative text is included when using non-English text, symbols, or images. Here, meaningful alternative text has been added to each of the images. Now, let's explore operable, or the use of buttons, navigation, and other interactive elements. For many, having material that is operable allows them to easily use assistive technology like voice recognition, keyboards, and screen readers to engage and navigate your content. Aligned to WCAG Success Criteria Number 2, operable is made up of 5 guidelines: keyboard accessible, enough time, seizures and physical reactions, navigable, and input modalities. Let's look at a common error related to operable. One of the most common operability errors has to do with single pathway navigation, providing the user one method for moving throughout the site or application. WCAG 2.1 AA requires that users have multiple pathways to access material and content, allowing them the option to navigate in a manner that best suits their needs. Consider the use of a consistent menu or a secondary navigation scheme such as a breadcrumb trail. Here, you can see the user has been provided a number of different navigation options to move throughout the site. Next is understandable, or easy to comprehend, learn, and remember for the next use. Aligned to WCAG Success Criteria Number 3, understandable is made up of 3 guidelines: readable, predictable, and input assistance. Let's look at a common error related to understandable. For understandable, one of the most common errors has to do with the consistency of navigation and layout throughout the site or application. As content is designed, consistent navigation can be sacrificed or forgotten. To ensure navigation is logical and repeatable, it is important to implement a consistent navigation throughout a website or application, as is required by WCAG 2.1 AA. Here, you can see a consistent layout and navigation logic across multiple pages. And finally, robust. Content must be robust enough that it can be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of users, allowing them to choose the technology they use to interact with websites, online documents, multimedia, and other information formats. Users will access and consume content with multiple technologies. Avoid limiting users to specific technologies. Robust is aligned to WCAG Success Criteria Number 4 and made up of 1 guideline: compatible. Let's look at a common error related to robust. When considering robustness of a site, one of the most common errors is the lack of or inconsistency in the use of status messages. Status messages can be related to multiple experiences within a website or application, including the communication of updates or notifications, but can also support the use of search, providing an auditory status around the number of results returned from a search. Here, a user would receive an audible status message, 4 results returned, when performing a search. Poor and the associated success criterias of WCAG are a great guide to ensure materials and technology are accessible to all. To learn more about the success criteria and guidelines aligned with POUR, go to www.w3.org/WAI/WCAG21/QuickRef/. Now let's dig into the requirements and processes for all state-approved electronic materials. For electronic materials, the process begins by selecting a third-party vendor to review your materials. Although publishers may select any third-party reviewer, if you need resources, a list of vendors will be shared later in this video. You will need to provide the vendor with the Accessibility Compliance Report cover sheet found on the TEA website. Once the review has been completed, submit the report and cover sheet to TEA. If any issues were identified during the review, you must provide the date when corrections will be finalized when submitting the final report. There is no need to hold your submission until these corrections are made. However, materials will not be available to order in the state ordering system until the issues are resolved. You can learn more about this process in the current accessibility guidelines for publishers. Finally, as you prepare your electronic materials, here are a few tips to ensure you achieve success. You can use these as a checklist during your process. Use an automated accessibility evaluation tool. Manually check labels and alternative text. Manually check dynamic content and forms. Ensure content can be controlled with a keyboard. Examine pages with browser and screen reader. Document experience with real users. Test sample of different components. While the State Department of Education does not endorse a specific third-party evaluation tool, here is a list of some of the most common vendors. Savvy Technology Solutions, Level Access, MicroAssist, Accessible Web, A10, and WeCo. Now let's dig into the requirements and processes for all state-approved print materials. The State Board of Education requires all publishers to provide content using the National Instructional Materials Accessibility Standard File Format, or NIMAS. Previously a manual process, the use of the NIMAS file format helps to speed up the process of producing alternative versions of instructional materials. NIMAS files are used by accessible instructional materials producers, or AIM producers, to facilitate the production of Braille, large print, and audio versions of materials. While TEA contracts with third-party AIM producers who will use the NIMAS files, the cost of NIMAS file production is the responsibility of the publisher. The National Instructional Materials Access Center, or NIMAC, is an online repository of source files in the NIMAS format. TEA requires NIMAS files to be both uploaded to the NIMAC and provided to the TEA-specified AIM producers. Let's walk through the entire process for submitting your requirements for print materials. For print materials, this process begins with the creation of a NIMAC account, if necessary. If you don't have an account or are unaware, you can email NIMAC directly at nimac@aph.org. Next, you will have your NIMAS files created, keeping in mind this process can take 2 to 3 months. Once the vendor has completed the NIMAS files, they should be uploaded to the NIMAC. Publishers should download a screenshot of the NIMAC validation wizard, showing that each file has passed validation. Then, TEA will provide the contact information of the designated Braille producers. An extractable, high-quality, color-accessible PDF of the exact print materials, a copy of the NIMAS files, and the screenshot from the NIMAC Validation Wizard should be sent to the Braille producer. For the final print deadline, publishers will provide 3 final print copies of all materials to the TEA-designated Braille, large print, and audio producers. The large print and audio producers will also need the high-quality PDFs and NIMAS files. Note: if any changes are made to print materials prior to the final print deadline, a complete list of side-by-side changes to the materials, along with updated PDFs and NIMAS files, will need to be submitted to the Braille producers when final print copies are submitted to them. Finally, corrected NIMAS files will also need to be submitted to the NIMAC if any changes were made. You can learn more about this process in the current accessibility guidelines for publishers. Thank you for watching this accessibility module as part of the Texas Education Agency's publisher orientation, and thank you for supporting equitable learning experiences for all students. To learn more about State Board of Education's accessibility requirements and the instructional materials review process, go to https://tea.texas.gov/academics/review-adoption-process/adoption-resources-for-publishers. And to submit questions, go to https://helpdesk.tea.texas.gov/instructional-materials-and-review-process/SBOE/